you go back to right before or right around when he took over. I wrote an article saying that Intel needs to split up. And the reason is that, look, the design business over time, like Intel owns markets like on-premise and government, and they do very well in PCs. They do have a lot of surrounding technology, and also like an Amazon or a Meta or Microsoft is going to do the work to get AMD at par. If you're sort of like you've been building on Intel forever, like a government agency, you're not going to buy anything else. It's just like, so they have good safe markets. Like it's not growing, but you can bring a lot of money out of it sort of over time. And that's sort of like, you become just a fabless business. You become like AMD. And then you have this foundry bit, which kind of is behind and doesn't have a reason to exist outside of sort of national security concerns, to be totally frank. Like there's just no economic reason. TSMC is ahead. They have scale. They're structurally better because they don't compete with their customers. And you really, and so.
So before we get to Gelsinger's plan, that was one of my questions. Is like, and we're now 25 minutes in, great overview of Intel history and where it all went wrong. But why is Intel important today? Is Intel important today? They don't make the best chips anymore. They don't have the best manufacturing. And, you know, what used to be a central role in the story of American technology now looks more peripheral or ceremonial. So, like, is that an unfair assessment of where Intel stands in 2024?
Economically speaking, no. There's no reason for any company to work with Intel when they can work with TSMC. And TSMC is kind of going for the kill. Like they're building a ton of 2 nanometer capacity. They built a ton of 3 nanometer capacity. They're not giving space to Intel, which is, I mean, kudos to them from a business perspective. But that is one of the many problems sort of Intel faces. And then, the x86, I mean, yes, there are niceties and advantages that come with Intel chips, as opposed to AMD, like, and there's things like FireWire and some of the various standards that they're involved in, not FireWire, Thunderbolt. But so there's things that, but by and large, no, there's not really a reason for them to exist. There is a long run. I think one of the critiques of TSMC is they did bring EUV to market. In the history of semiconductors, every few years, there's some sort of transformative new technology that has to come to keep Moore's Law going on. And the thing about Moore's Law is it's not an inevitability, it's a choice. You choose to figure out we hit a wall here, what's something else we can innovate on to sort of figure out what's going forward. And people are locked onto lithography because most people never knew what a chip was until 3 years ago. And at that time, lithography mattered. Lithography was just the current one. Before lithography, it was FinFET. So FinFET was basically making transistors 3D instead of 2D. And a extremely difficult, costly change that was pioneered by Intel. EUV was pioneered by Intel. Backside power, which is a new shift coming forward, was pioneered by Intel. The reality is that Intel, for all their flaws, has been the driving force between Moore's Law. They are the company that just has relentlessly not just pushed forward their chips, but has been investing and thinking about long-term technologies to the extent where TSMC has just been copying what Intel did for almost its entire existence. And I think
so does that culture still exist? You wrote on Tuesday that they spent a decade throwing spaghetti at the wall.
Well, so that was a product perspective from the actual, like, what's happening. Like, so gate all around is a new transistor type, and backside power that is downstream from Intel. Like I think there's legitimate questions and concerns. Is TSMC, yes, again, the EUV was great, but again, that was ultimately an Intel invention, and ASML played a big role in that, and for various reasons, Intel didn't. But is TSMC culturally capable and willing to push through Moore's Law to keep it going? Can they be the standard bearers for it? I certainly hope so, but I would say that remains to be seen. And
is that a challenge that all of these companies face? I mean, it's similar to Intel, where they had really successful business lines 12 and 13 years ago.
So here's the core.
Want to disrupt that.
Here's the core Intel problem. This goes back to my general view on life and people in general, like when I give career advice or whatever it might be, which is you have to understand two things. Number one, your strengths are your weaknesses. They're two sides of the same coin. Number two, you should focus your career on accentuating your strengths and doing the bare minimum necessary to ameliorate your weaknesses. Like that is how you get and so many people, they get so frustrated with their weaknesses, or they see the weaknesses in others without appreciating that as part and parcel of the strengths. And they want a world of no trade-offs where you just get all the best thing of everything. But then number two, they spend way too much time sort of ameliorating their weaknesses. And the reality is Intel is, if they were a person, it's the cockiest son of a bitch you've ever seen. They think they're the best in the world. They think they can defy physics. They can defy the limitations of materials, of light, of quantum mechanics.
Right.
And you know what? For 50 years, that's exactly what they did. And the problem is that the sort of entity that does that and is capable of that is really horrific to work with. Everyone hates Intel in tech. Everyone hates them. They've treated everyone like crap. They screw you over. They like, well, if you try to work with them, they'll steal your tech, and they're just and their whole way their processing would work was their manufacturing was such king of the world. They would like tell the design what to do. You need to adjust to figure out to work with us, XYZ. All of this is the exact opposite of how TSMC works. TSMC is there to serve you. They're going to help you out. They're going to figure it out. They have great customer service. They're going to have all the pieces you need. They're going to like adjust, like try to figure out, oh, can we adjust our process to get this to work for you? All these sorts of things. And I think so the problem with Intel becoming a foundry is they ended up in a situation where their success depended on getting really good at the exact stuff that they were bad at. And that's just a tough place for a person to be, and it's a tough place for a company to be. And on the flip side, the worry I have about TSMC in the long run is they are too good at customer service, and they're not. And do they have the arrogance and the annoyingness to work with to force the industry forward by sheer force of will?
Push it all forward. Yeah,
that's right. And so the problem. The point I came to a couple months ago, and I was so angsty writing this article, and I felt angsty afterward, and I still feel angsty today. Is that this cultural problem it can't be overcome. I just don't see how Intel ever acquires a meaningful customer base outside a national security incident, and it was very clear.
The answer to why is Intel important today? It's a national security concern going forward. Is the way the American government has framed it.
Yeah, the U.S. is like we talked before. Like Trump has accused Taiwan of being like the mafia and holding him up over chips. And the reason why, number one, that's correct, because number two, it's true. We are completely dependent on Taiwan, and Taiwan does not properly invest, in my estimation, in multiple facets in its own sort of self-defense, because it just assumes the U.S. will save them because the U.S. has no choice. And so
everyone's right.
The people, again, it's an all-time example of people getting really mad at Trump for saying something that's like just 100% true because of the way he said it.
Taiwan and TSMC they are also correct that we have no better option. But
that's right. That's right. But the problem you have this. The thing I kept coming back to is can like Intel's never going to fix this cultural problem. I think that's a reason they don't have any customers. No one trusts them. No one thinks they'll do it. Now no one's going to really trust them, right? Especially after they just kneecapped the guy that was building out this whole thing. And just to go back to Gelsinger's plan, he comes back to Intel and he's like, yeah, we're going to become a foundry. We're not going to split. We're all in. And there's a lot of logic to that. If you're going to build a foundry and you want to get customers, but you need scale, and Intel has its own scale. They sell a lot of chips. And so they were sort of their first best customer. The concern all along is if you don't truly split Intel, can you actually have a customer centric foundry? And I think that was the sort of the concern of lots of folks. At the same time, by all accounts, Gelsinger did a really good job fixing their technical processes. Like they're coming out with 18A next year. Now it's still TBD how well this is going to scale. They have their own internal 20A, or no, they skipped 20A. Like Intel 3, their margins were horrible last quarter because their costs spiraled out of control when they tried to scale it up. This is the big problem with the whole 5 nodes in 4 years. There's a lot of learnings and tacit knowledge that comes from not just inventing a process, but scaling a process. And it's TBD if Intel can scale 18A in sort of a meaningful way. But 18A is a big technical achievement. It's new transistors, gate-all-around transistors, and it's backside power, where it used to be you would have sort of the transistor level, and then you'd have all these communication wires. You have power on top. And the problem is these wires are getting thinner and thinner. You'd have this real problem of like interference of like trying to send power down these big thick cables and all these communication cables around it. Now you're putting power on the bottom, transistors in the middle, and the communication layers on top, which is much more elegant. You don't have the interference problem. It's also much more challenging because you're in your process, you're laying down all those power layers before you do the transistor layer, which is the most fragile, which means if you screw up on the transistor layer, you're throwing away a lot more work than you were sort of previously. That's why transistors are on the bottom first. You do the hardest stuff first, because if you screw up, then you lost sort of less process time. We don't know if it's going to scale, but it is a technical achievement. It is the sort of achievement that is helping push the industry forward, which is what Intel does. And my view is, look, at the end of the day, there's not an economic reason for the Intel foundry to exist. To the extent we want it to exist, the U.S. government needs to pay for it. If the U.S. government's going to pay for it, it needs to be viable in the long run. It needs to be separate from Intel, just because
entity.
And
the third-party customers, we've talked about this in the past, but the third parties that would potentially be working with Intel are taking a risk on a manufacturing process that may not be as reliable as TSMC. It may be more affordable in the short term, but like also if it
might be faster too. It's possible that Intel does retake the process lead, by the way.
Well, but the other concern for third-party customers is that if Intel is also serving itself with that foundry, then Intel is going to get the priority going forward. And so it makes more sense to sort of sever the connection if you're trying to market as a service business to third parties. Is that right? Am I remembering our previous conversations correctly?
I think that's correct, and you also can't overstate the extent to which everyone hates Intel. like it's a very real and true thing that I think is underrated and this is one where all the analysts there's a lot of semi analysts that got mad about my article and really disagreed with it, and I think they had all intellectual reasons that were correct. I think this is one area where I was influenced by being in Taiwan. And in Taiwan, I know lots of people that work in lots of suppliers and lots of areas that deal with semi chips. And you just can't escape that sentiment. Like there is a sense where you have people on an intellectual level want Intel to succeed because they understand why it was important. And they're also just delighting in their downfall because they hate those guys.